What if the fat that is actually killing you is completely invisible to you right now? You cannot see it, you cannot feel it, you cannot pinch it. But it is wrapping itself around your heart, squeezing your liver, inflaming your pancreas, and quietly setting the stage for a heart attack, diabetes, type 2 disease, and even cancer, while you are standing in front of the mirror thinking you look perfectly fine? Well, what if that thin person you see every morning has more dangerous fat inside their body than someone who visibly looks overweight? What if I told you that science has now discovered a precise biological protocol, not a diet, not a workout plan, not a supplement, but a real, research-backed system that speaks directly to your body's own fat-burning intelligence, switching off the very mechanism that visceral fat uses to survive, grow, and destroy you from the inside? What if your next meal could literally begin cutting off the blood supply to your most dangerous fat? What if sleep, the right foods, and your gut bacteria are the three fastest weapons you have never been taught to use? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear could be the most important information your body has ever needed. What if the most dangerous thing inside your body right now has absolutely no pain, no symptoms, no warning, and no visible sign? And yet it is silently organizing a biological attack against every vital organ you depend on to stay alive. I want you to think about something deeply before we go any further. When most people hear the word fat, they immediately picture something they can grab, something they can see in the mirror, something they can measure with a scale. But there is an entirely different category of fat living inside your body right now that operates nothing like the fat you can touch. It lives deep inside your abdominal cavity. It surrounds your organs. It has its own blood supply. It has its own hormonal system. And most shockingly, it behaves like a completely independent organ that is working against you every single moment of every single day. This fat is called visceral fat. And the reason it is so extraordinarily dangerous is not simply because it exists. It is because of what it does. Visceral fat is metabolically active. That means it does not just sit there silently like fat stored under your skin. It produces chemicals. It secretes inflammatory molecules called cytokines. It releases hormones that disrupt your insulin, your cortisol, your estrogen, your testosterone. It sends signals throughout your entire body that promote inflammation, accelerate aging, increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, drive type 2 diabetes, and have now been directly linked to multiple forms of cancer. This is not a theory. This is documented, peer-reviewed, published science, and it is more urgent than almost anything else being discussed in modern medicine today. Now, here's the part that should genuinely alarm you. You do not have to be overweight to have dangerous levels of visceral fat. There are millions of people walking around right now who appear thin, who have a completely normal body mass index, who have never been told by a doctor that they have a weight problem, and yet they carry lethal amounts of visceral fat around their internal organs. Scientists even have a name for this. They call it TOFI, thin outside, fat inside. And it represents one of the most misunderstood and underdiagnosed metabolic crises happening in the modern world. Your bathroom scale will never reveal this to you. Your mirror will never show it. And a standard doctor's appointment will almost certainly miss it entirely unless specific imaging is done. So how does visceral fat grow? It grows because of your lifestyle signals. Every time you eat ultra-processed food, you are feeding visceral fat. Every time you sleep less than 7 hours, you are feeding visceral fat. Every time chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, visceral fat receives a direct biological instruction to expand. Every time your gut microbiome is disrupted by antibiotics, alcohol, refined sugar, or artificial ingredients, the bacterial ecosystem that normally helps regulate fat storage collapses. And visceral fat seizes that opportunity to grow even deeper, even more aggressively. This is a system. This is a coordinated biological process. And to defeat it, you need an equally coordinated, equally scientific response. The first and perhaps most revolutionary concept in the fastest protocol to burn visceral fat is understanding a process called angiogenesis. Now, this word sounds complex, but what it describes is actually something that once you understand, you will never think about food the same way again. Angiogenesis is the process by which your body grows new blood vessels. And here is the critical insight. Visceral fat does not just randomly accumulate. It actively recruits new blood vessels to feed itself, to expand itself, to sustain itself. Without a blood supply, visceral fat cannot grow. Without those blood vessels delivering nutrients and oxygen, visceral fat begins to shrink and die. And the extraordinary discovery that science has given us is this: certain foods that you can eat today contain natural compounds that inhibit angiogenesis in fat tissue. They cut off the blood supply that visceral fat depends on for its survival. Think about what that means. Every time you eat a tomato rich in lycopene, every time you consume green tea loaded with EGCG, every time you eat dark berries filled with resveratrol and anthocyanins, you are not just eating healthy food. You are deploying a biological weapon directly against visceral fat. You are starving it. You are cutting off its lifeline at the molecular level. This is the food as medicine principle in its most powerful, most precise, most actionable form. And it works not because someone invented it in a laboratory. It works because these compounds evolved in plants over millions of years, and your body knows exactly how to use them. The second pillar of the fastest visceral fat-burning protocol is time-restricted eating, but not in the way the mainstream wellness world typically explains it. The critical factor is not simply how long you fast. The critical factor is alignment with your circadian biology. Your body operates on a 24-hour internal clock that governs virtually every metabolic process: insulin sensitivity, fat oxidation, cellular repair, hormone release. When you eat in alignment with this clock, consuming your food during daylight hours and allowing your body a genuine overnight metabolic rest, something remarkable happens. Your insulin levels drop, your growth hormone rises. Your body shifts from a fat-storing state into a fat-burning state. And the fat it burns first, when this is done correctly and consistently, is visceral fat, not subcutaneous fat, not muscle. Visceral fat, because it is the most metabolically reactive fat in your body, and it responds to hormonal environments faster than any other fat depot. Studies have demonstrated measurable reductions in visceral fat through time-restricted eating, even when total calorie intake remains unchanged. This is not about eating less. This is about eating in a window of time that harmonizes with your biological clock, allowing your hormonal system to do what it was designed to do: burn the most dangerous fat first. Eating late at night, even healthy food, disrupts this entire process because your body is no longer in a metabolic state optimized for fuel burning. It is in a state optimized for storage. And what it stores when you eat at midnight is not stored in harmless places. It is funneled directly into visceral fat depots. Now let us talk about your gut, because this is where the conversation about visceral fat becomes one of the most fascinating and most actionable areas of modern nutritional science. Inside your digestive system right now, there are approximately 38 trillion microorganisms: bacteria, fungi, viruses, collectively called your microbiome. And this community of living organisms does not simply help you digest food. It communicates directly with your metabolism. It regulates your immune system. It produces neurotransmitters that affect your mood and your brain. And critically, it controls the signals that determine whether your body stores fat or burns fat, and where it stores that fat when it does. Specific strains of beneficial bacteria, Akkermansia, Mucinifila, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Bifidobacterium longum, have been scientifically shown to reduce visceral fat accumulation. They do this by producing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which directly signal your fat cells to shift from storage mode into oxidation mode. They reduce intestinal permeability, the phenomenon known as leaky gut, which, when present, allows bacterial toxins called lipopolysaccharides to enter your bloodstream and trigger the systemic inflammation that visceral fat thrives in. When your gut barrier is strong, when your microbiome is diverse and healthy, your body's entire inflammatory environment shifts, and visceral fat loses the inflammatory fuel it needs to sustain itself. How do you build this microbiome? Through prebiotic-rich foods: garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, Jerusalem artichokes, slightly underripe bananas. Through fermented foods: kimchi, kefir, miso, tempeh, sauerkraut, which deliver live beneficial bacteria directly into your gut ecosystem. Through dietary fiber, not just any fiber, but diverse fiber from a wide variety of plant sources, because different bacterial strains feed on different types of fiber. The science is unambiguous here. People with greater dietary diversity, greater fiber intake, and greater consumption of fermented foods have measurably less visceral fat, even when controlling for total calorie consumption. Your gut is not a passive player in this story. It is an active, powerful, intelligent partner in your visceral fat reduction protocol. The third pillar that most people completely overlook, and this is one of the most shocking correlations in all of modern obesity and metabolic research, is sleep. Not exercise, not diet, sleep. When you sleep fewer than 7 hours per night, your cortisol levels rise. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone, and it has a direct molecular conversation with your fat cells. It tells them to store. It tells them specifically to deposit fat in the visceral region, around your organs. Because from an evolutionary perspective, stress signals danger, and your body prepares for danger by storing energy where it can be rapidly mobilized, which is visceral fat. So every night you sleep poorly, you are receiving a hormonal instruction to grow your most dangerous fat. Beyond cortisol, sleep deprivation suppresses your levels of leptin, the hormone that tells your brain you are full, while simultaneously elevating ghrelin, the hormone that tells your brain you are hungry. The result is that you wake up after a poor night's sleep biologically wired to crave calorie-dense, sugar-rich, processed food. Not because you lack willpower, not because you are undisciplined, but because your hormonal environment has been precisely engineered by sleep deprivation to drive you toward exactly the foods that feed visceral fat most efficiently. This is biology. This is chemistry. And recognizing it changes everything. Deep, restorative sleep, 7 to 9 hours for most adults, triggers the release of growth hormone during the first few hours of sleep onset. Growth hormone is one of the most powerful natural fat-burning compounds your body produces. It promotes lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat, and it preferentially targets visceral fat. So while you are sleeping deeply and peacefully, your body is literally dismantling visceral fat depots and converting that stored energy into fuel. Sleep is not passive recovery. Sleep is one of the most active, most precise, most scientifically validated visceral fat-burning protocols available to every human being on this planet, and it costs absolutely nothing. Now, let us talk about specific foods, because this is where science becomes genuinely thrilling. Extra virgin olive oil contains a compound called oleocanthal, which has been shown to reduce visceral fat-promoting inflammation at the same potency as ibuprofen, without the side effects. Tomatoes and tomato paste contain lycopene, which directly inhibits the angiogenesis that feeds visceral fat. Green tea contains EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, which has been demonstrated in multiple clinical trials to specifically reduce visceral fat area when consumed consistently. Wild salmon, sardines, and mackerel provide omega-3 fatty acids that reduce the inflammatory signaling that visceral fat depends upon. Walnuts provide alpha-linolenic acid and polyphenols that simultaneously feed beneficial gut bacteria and reduce visceral fat-promoting inflammation. Dark chocolate above 70% cacao contains flavonols that improve insulin sensitivity, reducing one of the primary drivers of visceral fat accumulation. These are not superfoods in a marketing sense. These are foods that contain precise molecular compounds that interact with your biology in documented, measurable ways. When you build your diet around these foods, not occasionally, not as a supplement to an otherwise poor diet, but as the foundation of how you eat, you create an internal environment that is chemically hostile to visceral fat. You shift the balance of power inside your own body. And what about movement? The research on visceral fat and exercise is clear, but also nuanced in ways that most fitness advice ignores. Steady-state cardio burns calories, but it does not produce the hormonal environment most efficiently targeted at visceral fat. What does? High-intensity interval training, short, intense bursts of effort followed by recovery periods, produces a powerful post-exercise hormonal cascade that includes elevated catecholamines and growth hormone, both of which specifically mobilize visceral fat for oxidation. Resistance training builds lean muscle mass, which raises your basal metabolic rate, meaning your body burns more fat at rest, around the clock. And even non-exercise activity, standing instead of sitting, walking after meals, taking stairs, has been shown to significantly reduce visceral fat accumulation because it prevents the metabolic stagnation that occurs when we remain sedentary for extended periods. The combination of brief, intense movement, consistent resistance training, and simply avoiding prolonged sitting creates a metabolic environment where visceral fat has no opportunity to accumulate unchallenged. Movement is not just about burning calories in the moment. It is about permanently altering your hormonal and metabolic landscape so that visceral fat cannot find the biological conditions it needs to grow. Chronic stress management deserves its own dedicated attention in this protocol. Cortisol, as we established, is one of visceral fat's most powerful allies. And in the modern world, cortisol is chronically elevated in the majority of the population because of work pressure, financial stress, relationship conflict, digital overstimulation, and the relentless pace of contemporary life. Mindfulness practice, deep breathing exercises, time in nature, social connection, and even simple intentional rest all reduce cortisol. They are not soft wellness concepts. They are hard metabolic interventions that directly change the hormonal chemistry that visceral fat depends on. A person who eats perfectly and exercises regularly but lives in a constant state of chronic stress will still accumulate visceral fat because the cortisol signal overrides everything else. Managing stress is not optional in this protocol. It is essential. Hydration is another factor that quietly governs visceral fat metabolism in ways that most people never consider. Adequate water intake, approximately 2 to 3 liters per day depending on body size and activity, is essential for the liver to efficiently process and metabolize fat. When you are chronically underhydrated, your liver prioritizes fluid balance over fat metabolism, effectively pausing the fat-burning process. Green tea, as mentioned, provides both hydration and active fat-burning compounds. Sparkling water with a squeeze of lemon provides hydration without the sugar that would spike insulin and promote visceral fat storage. Even mild chronic dehydration, the kind most people walk around with daily without knowing, impairs the metabolic efficiency required to burn visceral fat at its fastest possible rate. The final piece of this protocol, and perhaps the one that ties everything together, is consistency over intensity. The research is extraordinarily clear on this point. Extreme approaches, crash diets, excessive exercise, severe caloric restriction do not preferentially burn visceral fat. They often trigger the very stress hormones that promote visceral fat accumulation. They create inflammatory conditions, they disrupt the gut microbiome, and they are never sustainable. What burns visceral fat fastest over a meaningful time frame is the consistent application of moderate but precise interventions. The right foods, the right eating window, the right sleep, the right movement, the right stress management, applied day after day after day with intelligent persistence. Visceral fat accumulated over years cannot be eliminated in days. But with the right protocol applied consistently, measurable reductions in visceral fat can be achieved in as little as 12 weeks. And the changes you feel in your energy, your mental clarity, your inflammation levels, your cardiovascular risk begin even before the imaging equipment can measure the difference. Your body wants to be free of visceral fat. It has the biological machinery to eliminate it. It has the hormonal systems, the enzymatic pathways, the cellular mechanisms required to dismantle visceral fat and convert it into energy. What it needs from you is the right environment, the right food signals, the right sleep signals, the right hormonal signals, the right microbial signals, to activate that machinery and sustain it long enough to make a real, lasting, measurable difference to your health and to your life. The message of everything we have explored today comes down to one profound truth. Your body is not your enemy. Visceral fat is not inevitable. Metabolic disease is not your destiny. The science is clear, the protocol is real, and the power to change your internal biology exists in the choices you make starting from your very next meal, your sleep tonight, the stress you choose to release, and the movement you choose to embrace tomorrow morning. You are not fighting against your body. You are learning to speak its language. The language of food as medicine, of sleep as therapy, of your microbiome as an ally, of your hormones as a communication system that responds to everything you do. Speak the right language, consistently and intelligently, and your body will respond in ways that will transform not just how you look, but how long and how well you live.